All right, joining us now on the program is Tunji Light Ariomo, an expert in infrastructure, energy, and process automation engineering with a strong background in developing policy and regulatory frameworks. Welcome to the program, Mr. Ariomo. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.
It's my pleasure.
You're welcome, sir. Now, in Nigeria, electricity distribution is handled by 11 private companies, and these discos operate within specific geographical regions and are responsible for distributing electricity from the national grid to consumers. This morning, we will be discussing the federal government's plans to overhaul Nigeria's power sector. But first, I want to start. How do you assess the federal government's decision to overhaul underperforming discos, and what impact do you think it will have on the sector?
Well, it's welcome development. It shows that we are doing something. I think it is more dangerous if we are not doing anything. The fact that we are doing something is good. And like I have stated often, I have no doubt about the sincerity of the current administration led by Asiwaju Bola Ahmed to ensure that we fix the perennial challenges we have had in the power sector. But the same thing also applies to previous presidents and commander-in-chiefs. From the time of Obasanjo, Yaradua, Jonathan, Buhari, up till the present administration, I do not think we have ever had a commander-in-chief that wasn't interested in solving the problem. However, regardless of their interests or pronouncements, we now have a recurring decimal, and that is the fact that the problem remains unsolved. There are two possibilities. It's either this problem is too unsolvable, or simply because we are doing the wrong thing. Now, the latter, that is, if we are doing the wrong thing, is highly probable, because we are not the only nation on earth that desires to have good electricity supply. Other nations have attained that, even those that were our peers, that struggled with us, that experienced difficulties with us at the same time, they've been able to scale and now enjoy uninterrupted power supply. So it means that the issue is not that the problem is insurmountable. So the issue therefore will be that our methodology, our approach, maybe they have not been good enough. So this is where I always try to separate the commander-in-chief from sector leaders. By commander-in-chief, I'm referring to the president, the man who calls the shot in Nigeria as our chief executive. But when I said sector leaders, I'm referring to ministers, commissioners, those privileged to be in charge of the power sector on behalf of the commander-in-chief. If their recommendations are not good enough, then, except if the commander-in-chief himself has some understanding on how to fix the sector, then we would remain perpetually in darkness. So I read recent aspiration, expressed by the minister, especially regarding the need for money, about $10 billion per annum. Even the Senate, the leadership of the Senate as of yesterday, made it known that we are so much in debt now, even governments owing power generators and so on. But my challenge has been that, is this how government manages power sector in other countries? Let me rephrase this. We have succeeded in fixing the ancient issues we had with telecommunication. Today, telecommunication, when we have issues, we think about companies like Glo, companies like MTN, companies like Airtel, and so on. We are already used to the fact that the provision of the base station cell sites across the nation, as well as the fiber metric rings across Nigeria, that they are not the problem of government. They are the problem of those charged business-wise with the development, deployment of needed infrastructure and their operation. And those are those businesses. So we're already attuned to that. But the power sector is different because government continues to dictate the pace. And government is doing it often in breach of its own trust. For example, the federal government led the provision to ensure that states of the federation are now able to also manage the power sector so that they enjoy full concurrence. But it is unfortunate to observe that there are agencies of the federal government that are actually undermining that beautiful policy, growth and development. Just towards the end of last year, we had serious debate on the issue of NEMSA. That's the organization that regulates standards, and their desire to be able to tell electricity distribution companies what pole to disconnect from the grid and what poles not to disconnect from the grid. And as of last 2 months, they still issued letters to Ondo State distribution company, that's the Benin Disco, to disconnect certain communities or houses from power. How are you going to have growth, development, when you have such an organization that is at variance with the sector, the trust of the sector, and the philosophy that the federal government under President Tinubu has embraced? These kind of issues will continue to prevent the sector from being able to get it right. The sector must be driven by the private sector. And why? Because the private sector's desire for profit can be harnessed by government to promote efficiency. If you are in the private sector and you're a player, and you know, for example, that you have been maybe considered to give electricity to, let's say, Akinyele in Ibadan, or let's say Isolo in the state capital. You know that your continuing to be in business is tied to your performance or service delivery. You are likely going to do better and ensure nothing toys with your service delivery. Yes. But that is not the model we are running. The model we are currently running are deliberately laden with loopholes to ensure that service delivery does not determine your earning. That's why you can have a so-called distribution company in Ondo, which has been unbundled, but that has refused for over 1 year to appoint a chief executive. Yes, the Ondo subco, the subco that is supposed to be a successor company to BEDC in Ondo State, has practically refused to comply with Ondo State government regulations, with tacit support from NEC in Abuja. So in this kind of environment, how do you achieve progress where the regulator in Ondo State issues a directive and then that very organization is hiding under the regulator in Abuja, and the same organization refuses to invest a penny in the power sector in Ondo State? So the people still go around contributing money to buy transformers when you know that it is actually illegal. It's illegal even under federal law, it's illegal under state law. So the issue at stake is not only about money, because I've seen that being pushed as a narrative by leaders in the sector that they need money. No, you need money, but you need something much more important than money, and it's in getting the methodology right. We need to first understand what we're doing. When we understand what we're doing, and then we can leverage opportunities. The fact that we're able to see others that have run ahead of us. We're not the first to run this route.
I'm here.
We are not the first. Nigeria is not the first to be in this situation. Others have been in these situations ahead of us, before us. So a wise person will learn from the mistakes of others. So you ask yourself, in the US, for instance, the national regulator of standard, does it determine what happens in New York State in terms of electricity standard? The answer is no. New York State has its own regulator that determines what happens in New York State. So when you're talking about decentralization, it is holistic. So instead of you looking at the power sector from the perspective of a one man seated in Abuja who is trying to solve a problem of 224 million people, you will now have 36 heads, good heads, in different parts of Nigeria that are trying to solve smaller chunks of that problem. You have the guy in Lagos who is trying to fix that problem for almost 20 million people. And you will not be a clock in the wheel of progress. So currently, what we operate is convoluted and is preventing us being able to fix the sector.
All right, now, Mr. Ariomo, you talked about weak financial incentives, which you actually said is not the major problem of this discourse. But the Minister of Power has actually mentioned weak financial incentives as a major issue. Now, what incentives would you propose to encourage discourse to invest in infrastructure upgrades?
Thank you. First thing first, what are we operating? Do we have rules? Do we have law? What does the Constitution say? The Constitution says that power is on the concurrent legislative list, which means the federal government has power, federal legislators have authority, state government have power, state houses of assembly have authority to create laws. So it means there is a shared responsibility. So the first thing to get done is for the minister to lead the actualization of that decentralization as provided for in our constitution. And not only lead it by word of mouth, in action. For example, if an organization in Abuja is undermining what we're trying to achieve as a nation, the head of that organization should be removed, should be sanctioned. It is when you have proper rule of law in place that you can enforce policy. Then the federal government, the minister, should not introduce policies that are contradictory to the direction of decentralization. That is number two. So if you say Lagos State can be on its own, you don't come in, stay in Abuja and be promoting actions that will undermine the regulator in Lagos State. Rather, what you should do is to promote activities that will encourage Lagos State to bond with Ogun State, to bond with Ondo State, because they are contiguous, they are close to one another, and leverage opportunities for interstate exchange of energy. That way is similar to what's in the Bible. It says one man sharpens the face of another. So a state can sharpen the face of another state. Where Lagos has surplus, that surplus can be willed over to Ogun State, and where Ogun has excess, Ogun can will to Ondo State. So we have interoperability. So that is so it is. We need to first fix the system in terms of methodology and the philosophy of operation before we talk about money. Otherwise, as it stands today, okay, the minister mentioned $10 billion.
Yes.
If you give us $500 billion today, it will like in engineering it will just sink. No, in engineering we have the source, we have the sink in terms of energy transfer. It will if you put 500 billions in that sector today, it will go to waste. Because we need to first get the sector itself right. It is after we have gotten the sector right, and this must be driven by knowledge, adequate knowledge. And then patriotism. Who are the people in charge of the different layers of markets in the sector? For example, distribution, long distance transmission, generation, market operation. Who are these businesses? Are they experienced businesses, or are they there because they are my relations, because they are my friends? We didn't do that in the liberalization of telecom sector, and that was why we got it right with the telecom sector. In the telecom sector, it was global. We brought in the best operators across the world, and they brought, because of the assurance of time that, oh, you will operate this for the next 10 years, for the next 10 to 20 years. So they know they will approach financing houses and give them the book that, see, Nigeria has given us 10 years to operate this, and it is exclusive. We are just 3 of us. We have held meeting. I will face this side, this guy will face this side. We will operate it for 10 years. And we have done our financial model. From our financial model, we are expecting so amount of money. So financial house, give us this amount of money. If you give us, in 10 years, we will pay back. Do you get it now?
Yes.
So because of what the government has done, give them, one, the environment that is good for business. Then number 2, a sovereign approval and a sovereign guarantee that your business will not be tampered with for the next 10 years, 20 years, if you perform well. When you put all of this together, their businesses immediately became bankable. They were able to source external funding, and they brought in this fund, and Nigeria so far has kept its own side of the bargain. Nigeria has kept its own side of the bargain. You notice that up till now, the number of operators in the telecom sector are minimal. So that makes room for reliable profit projection, that you can say, okay, this is what we will get. And so that sector has stabilized. We need to do the same thing. In the power sector, they are similar. I've listened to engineers, my colleagues, saying they are not similar, but they are similar. Those who say they are not similar, they are not looking at electricity as a product. There is exchanging hands, bringing in money and also offering service. But that is what electricity is. So if you have a franchise area, for instance, and that's why I must commend my colleague, Engineer Johnson Alabi, the current special advisor on energy in Ondo State, who is pursuing rigorously to ensure that we can fix the power sector. Use Ondo State as an example. If we cannot support that engineer, we will have franchise areas across Ondo State, and Ondo State will be able to extricate its communities from the perpetual grip of a non-performing Benin disco. And that is how, because of that assurance of time, oh, you guys will be there for 20 years, you will operate this for 10 years, it will be easier for private sector fund to come into the sector.
All right, Mr. Okay, Mr. Ario, Mr. Ariomo, let me cut you short. They're still on franchising because our time is fast spent. How do you see this improving electricity distribution, and how can it be effectively implemented?
Thank you for the question. Franchising itself is a business model. It simply indicates that you have somebody who has maybe like a large business operational sphere and is willing to grant a franchise to some smaller unit across. So, in Ondo State, that is being considered because we have and I'm very sorry, apology for this, we have the unfortunate, the misfortune of having to host an organization like BEDC, non-performing, but already given mandates by the federal government, business mandate. So it is difficult to just push them away, except if there is a handshake between the state government and the federal government. So in an environment where it is difficult to give them away, what do? You now take portions of the state, smaller portions, and give them out to more serious companies that are willing to invest their money in the sector. So that is about the model of franchising that can work here. Another model that can work here is if Ondo State government stands firm and wields the big stick, because already Ondo State Electricity Regulatory Bureau is, as far as Ondo State is concerned, the only regulator known by law. If Benin's child company or successor company refuses to obey the laws, refuses to comply with regulations, the law and existing regulations empower the state government to wield the big stick and say, we don't want you again. Withdraw their license and therefore transfer the responsibility to an organization like the Ondo State Power Company, OSPC. If OSPC takes charge, OSPC can now firm out different parts of Ondo State, to private investors that are serious and give them mandates, give them performance targets, that for you to continue to hold this franchise, you need to meet this level of services. My sister, let me tell you, the power sector is richer than the telecom sector. What we are doing wrong over the past 30 years is what has, pushed us to this cul-de-sac where the power sector has become a sink for resources rather than being an enabler of resources. If we can do it right, first fix the methodology, fix the philosophy, know the direction we are going, then we can attract funding, not direct funding from government. No. Funding from the private sector, but backed by government sovereign approval and guarantee that the businesses will be intact, that you will enjoy your full authority over your business for a reasonable length of time, to enable you as a business to recoup all the finances that you would have to source, for your performance. That is what has been done in other places where we have seen electricity thrive, in the US, in Canada, in the United Kingdom, etc. You don't go to those places seeing government budgeting billions of dollars every year for the power sector. No, that's not the way it works. Once you put that in place where government is budgeting and putting it in, you've created opportunity for unlimited corruption, and people will latch on to that opportunity, and you will never leave that vicious circle.
Okay.
Is what we're currently facing in Nigeria.
All right, Mr. Ariomo. Now, the federal government's roadmap emphasizes reforming discourse from within and also integrating experienced external professionals in the reform process. Let's have your thought on that.
You see, I told you of my immense respect for Mr. President, but I have limited respect for those who are sector leaders. We speak too much grammar. What discourse are you reforming? Discourse are handling distribution ends that have tactically been ceded to state governments. How can you reform what you don't have control over? Should I repeat myself? Go and check the Constitution as amended March 2023. President Muhammadu Buhari assented to the amendment of the Constitution. That Constitution has taken distribution entirely away from the grip of the National Assembly and put squarely within the ambit of State House of Assembly for legislation. Now, if that has the only distribution that the National Assembly can legislate upon will be distribution between Nigeria, inter-communities. Between, let's say, look at Republic of Benin and the Ogun State, for instance. Communities around that area that are the boundary, at the international boundaries of Nigeria. Those are the only communities where the National Assembly can interfere in the matters of distribution. Distribution is no longer under the is to issue an instrument. Tell Mr. President and say, states are in charge. States will need resources. They will need technical capacity because states are not likely. In fact,